This is part 2, Homer and the Odyssey, Key Talking Points, focusing on Homeric poems in general and the Bard. Looking at Homeric poems, they are the product of the Greek Dark Ages. Back in those times, people passed stories from mouth to mouth, person to person. Originally, stories passed through word of mouth. Notice here the whispering in the ear of many different adventures. You could have a knight riding on his fancy steed. You could have the damsel in distress. Or there were stories of grand sea adventures sailing all around. This is what the ancients did with their spare time. They sat around a campfire, they sat on their rocks, and they waited for the bard to come and relay these stories. Oftentimes the bard would roam through town, gather the people, and begin to sing his tales, which were eventually written down by our bard Homer, for example. You can think of these stories as mini-series. If you've ever seen on TV a mini-series where it starts 2 hours one night, 2 hours the next night, and you can't wait to watch and watch and watch. The bard would roam into town, and the people for entertainment would gather around. They would listen to their stories. They would go home, go to bed, go to work the next day, and again in the evening would listen to these stories. Homer wanted to take the idea of these stories, and instead of having to wait for a bard to come into your town, he wanted them to be in front of you where you could read them in the written word. Alright, so talking about our bard here. A bard was a profession at the time, a profession of storytelling. Not right away were they totally respected, but they did gain a reputation as they built their craft. They began combining stories into larger narratives. They had a little story, and then they had a bigger story, and a bigger story. And if you look at your Odyssey book, it is 3,000 plus lines of beautifully told story. So these bards were really good at spinning these tales. They mainly memorized and retold these tales to each town center that they went to. As they did this, their status in society rose. People wanted to listen to these stories. They waited for the bards to come into town. It was very big entertainment. Okay, so this also plays into the introduction of our tale and our great storyteller Homer. He was a bard, just like this guy here, and he sung epic poems and decided to write them down. The main story that he told was of the Trojan War. The Iliad was about the actual war, going to war, fighting for Helen, and the Greeks triumphing over the Trojans. And then our Odyssey is about one specific Greek king who is coming home from that Trojan War over the seas, through all the turmoil, to try and get back to his land of Ithaca safely to his wife, Penelope, and his child, Telemachus.